The heat had stood over Wendell since noon, and the carriage had stood in it for 2 hours. It was a closed carriage, black and new, the Wexmore arms painted so lately on the door that the gilt still smelled of varnish, and inside it the air had gone thick and close as fleece. Lynette Ashe sat very straight upon the hot leather and did not once lift her fan. A woman who fans herself is a woman who is waiting. She had decided somewhere in the middle of the second hour that she was not waiting for anyone. She was merely sitting in a carriage on a warm afternoon. It is a small distinction, and it cost her a great deal to keep, and she kept it. Beyond the glass, the forecourt of Kestrel Hall lay gold and shimmering, and entirely without its master. The county had come. That was the cruelty of it, though no cruelty had been intended, which is the worst kind of all. They stood along the wide steps and under the limes in their wedding silks, the neighboring families, the parson in his good coat, the tenants at the gravel's edge, and they had come to see a duke married, and instead they were watching a woman not be. For the first hour they had pitied her, but pity has a short life in the heat, and by the second hour it had curdled, as it always does, into the other thing, the watching, the low pleasure people take in a spectacle that is not their own. She felt it settle on the carriage like dust. She gave them the back of her bonnet, the clean line of her jaw, and nothing else at all. The horses fretted in the traces. Somewhere in the valley a church bell had rung the half-hour once, hopefully, then thought better of itself and gone quiet, and the silence after a bell is louder than the bell. 2 hours. She had counted them not by any clock, but by the shadow of the west tower creeping across the gravel toward the wheels, and when its edge touched the near wheel she understood, with the clean, quiet certainty that had always been her one true gift, exactly what was being said to her. She was being shown her price. A man does not leave a thing he values standing in the sun. He leaves a thing he has bought, and does not much want, and means to fetch in when it suits him, the way you leave a bale on a wharf because the tide is not going anywhere, and neither is the bale. Lynette Ashe had been weighed and priced her whole life by her father's clerks, by the drapers' wives who took her money across a counter and not her card across a threshold, by every drawing room that had done the sum of her father's warehouses and come up short. She knew the feeling the way a sailor knows weather in the skin before it comes. And she found, at 23, in that oven of a carriage, that she had come to the very end of her patience with it. She drew off one glove. From her reticule, she took the single thing she carried everywhere. It was a small brass weight, a merchant's ounce weight, worn dark and smooth at the corners by 40 years of her father's thumb and then her own, a common thing, worth nothing to any soul but her. She closed her hand round it once, for ballast, the way another woman might close her hand in prayer. Then she leaned forward and rapped on the little hatch behind the driver's box. It slid back, old Sowerby's uneasy red face beneath his hat. "Miss." "Drive on, Mr. Sowerby, miss." His eyes went agonized to the great shut door of the hall. "His Grace, that is, we was to wait upon His Grace the wedding. His Grace is not here." She said it without any heat at all, which is the only way to say a thing you truly mean. "I have waited on him 2 hours in front of half the county, and I find I have finished. Drive on." "The Dower House, or the Saltmouth Road. I leave it to you. Only take up your reins and drive, for I will not sit here 1 minute more to be looked at." Something in the plain evenness of it moved the old man where an hour of shouting would not have. He faced front, he gathered the reins, and the new black carriage with its fresh gilt arms wheeled a wide, slow, unhurried circle upon the gravel of Kestrel Hall and went off down the long lime avenue toward the gates, while 50 of the best people in the county stood in their wedding silks and watched the bride drive herself away. She did not look back. Had she looked back, she would have seen the great door open at last 2 hours and a quarter late, and a tall man in black step out onto the topmost stair, into the hard gold light, and stop. But she did not look back. She had learned long ago that looking back is what you do when you are not certain of your figures, and Lynette Ashe was always certain of her figures. The carriage passed out through the tall iron gates of Kestrel Hall in the very moment the man on the step opened his mouth to call after her a name. He had never once, in all the making of the bargain, troubled to learn how to say. The Duke of Wexmore stood upon his own steps and watched the dust of his own carriage go out through his own gates, and could not for a moment make sense of what he saw. Cassian Ray had commanded a frigate at 29. He was not a man used to arriving somewhere and finding the thing simply gone. He looked at the empty, glittering gravel, and at the county looking at him, and the county, with the swift mercy of the very well-bred, discovered all at once a deep interest in its own gloves. "Shall I send a rider after them, your grace?" murmured Thurkel at his elbow. The Duke did not answer. The truth, which he would not have surrendered under torture, was that he had not been able to come down. He had got as far as the long gallery, and there the old thing had risen in his throat that always rose when he was asked to be the Duke his brother should have lived to be. His feet would not move. He had stood with his hand flat to the cold stone while 2 hours ran out through the floor. He would sooner have gone back under fire. "No," he said, "let her go." And then, because pride is the last thing a proud man parts with, "She will come back, Thurkel. They always come back. A merchant's daughter does not drive away from a coronet on a warm afternoon. She will think better of it by supper and be the more grateful for my patience." "Very good, your grace," said Thurkel, which after 40 years in service was the phrase he kept for things he did not believe. He thought, though he would have swallowed his own teeth before saying so, that his grace had just told the one lie a proud man can least afford, the lie he tells about the one person who was not afraid of him. He said none of it, and went in to see about the wedding supper. No one would now eat. What no one at Kestrel Hall knew, not the Duke, not the county, not the old butler who believed he had seen everything a house could do, was that Lynette Ashe had never needed to come at all. The marriage had been made, the way such marriages always are by other people, over her head. On one side stood the Dowager Duchess of Wexmore, 80 years old and clear-eyed as a stooping hawk, with a great house going quietly to ruin beneath her and a debt falling due at Michaelmas that she could not name in company. On the other had stood Lynette's father, Thomas Ashe of Saltmouth, who began life carrying other men's bales along the harbor wall and ended it, owning the wall, the warehouses, and 11 ships upon the sea, and who wanted, before he died, the one thing his money had never bought him, a daughter the drawing rooms could not look through. A duke for the merchant's girl, a fortune for the duke's cold stones. Both sides had reckoned it a fair trade. The girl was the wrapping, the money was the gift. Only Thomas Ashe, who had loved his daughter far better than he ever managed to tell her, had done one quiet thing before he died that spoiled the whole clean shape of it. He had tied the money so that it did not, on her marriage, pass to her husband. Not a farthing. He had bound the entire Ashe fortune to her sole and separate use, hers to hold, hers to give, hers to keep back, with the stubbornness of a man who had spent 40 years watching lighter men spend heavier men's money, so that his Lynette, whatever the world made of her, should never be a purse for a husband to turn out. She would be the hand that held the strings. Lynette knew it. That was the true secret she carried north, heavier and better hidden than the brass weight in her reticule. The Duke believed he was marrying a rescue. He was marrying a woman who could lift the mortgage from his house, or let the whole of it slide down into the mere with a single word, and who had told no one alive which word she meant to say. She had not come because she was bought. She could have stayed in Saltmouth rich and free. She had come for a reason of her own she had told nobody, promising herself, on the long road up, to spend not 1 shilling and speak not 1 vow until she had seen whether there was anything in this drowning house worth the saving, and any man in it who might one day look at her. 2 hours in a hot carriage had very nearly given her his answer, Very nearly, but not quite. There was Michaelmas yet to come, and the debt, and the one word only, she could say. And there were, though she did not yet know their names, a soft-spoken man with a false ledger and a sweet-voiced woman with a hard eye, who had both, before the harvest was in, come to have the strongest of reasons to see the merchant's daughter driven back down the Saltmouth Road for good. The carriage did not take the Saltmouth Road. Old Sowerby, given the whole of it to decide and terrified of deciding wrong, did what a servant caught between a duke and a dowager always does. He drove toward the older title. He took her to the dower house at Wenlow, at the edge of the park, where the dowager duchess had removed herself the year her grandson came home from the sea, and proved he could not be managed. Araminta, Dowager Duchess of Wexmoor, was 82. She had buried a husband, 2 sons, and a grandson, and had not yet met the thing that could make her lower her eyes. A woman with a face like a folded fan, hands gone to bird claws with the years, and eyes that had not aged at all. She was sitting bolt upright at her window, when the bride, who was not a bride, came up her gravel, 2 hours after the wedding. That had not happened. She looked Linnet up and down for a long moment. "So, you are the young woman who drove away from my grandson in front of the whole county. I am, your grace, and I will not apologize for it. I did not ask you to." Something moved far back in the old eyes, dry and pleased, like the first crack in river ice. "In 60 years I have watched every soul in this valley wait upon a Wexmoor. Wait in halls, wait in weather, wait in the rain at the church door. You are the first I ever saw make a Wexmoor wait on an empty forecourt. Sit, there where I can see your face. We shall take some tea, and you will tell me nothing but the truth, for I am too old to be any use to a liar." Linnet stayed. She had told herself she would look before she leaped, and here was the ledge, and she looked. What she saw over the next fortnight would have frightened a woman with less arithmetic in her. Kestrel Hall was not merely poor. It was drowning. And drowning the way a great ship drowns, slowly, with all its lamps still lit, while the men aboard argue over the silver. The debt she had heard named at Michaelmas was only the part above the water. And over the whole of it, holding every key and every book, stood one soft, careful, chapel-going man, Mr. Barnabas Culver, the agent, who had come into his full kingdom 2 years since, in the very week they pulled the young duke out of the Ven. For that was the wound at the middle of the house, and Linnet found it the way you find the cold current in a warm river, all at once, with the whole leg. 2 years back, the true Duke, Corwin, the elder, the one bred to it, had gone into the flooded ford at Blackford on a black night and not come out. And Cassian, the second son, the sea officer, who had never expected to inherit anything but a sword and a share of prize money, had come home from the blockade to a coronet he did not want, a house he did not know how to hold, and a grief he could not set down. He signed what Culver put before him, because signing was easier than reading his dead brother's hand. And in the mews behind the stable-yard, unflown and unmanned these 2 years, the dead Duke's peregrine falcon screamed at every soul who came near her, and no one in that whole frightened house had the nerve to try her. Linnet stood in the stable-yard on her 3rd morning, and listened to the hawk scream, and understood that she was listening to the estate itself. The dowager let her look for a fortnight before she said what she wanted. That was the measure of the woman. She had a use for Linnet from the first hour, and was far too clever to name it before the girl had seen enough to say yes with her eyes open. She named it on a wet evening in the small parlor, with the rain coming down the chimney and hissing on the coals. "Sit," said Araminta. "I am going to speak plainly, and you will not interrupt, for what I have to say is expensive to me, and I shall only say it once." She folded her ruined hands. "My grandson is no fool, but he is a man in mourning, and that is a different creature altogether. However alike the two may look from across a room, he has handed one man the run of everything because he cannot bear to open the books his brother kept. I cannot prove a single false figure, I am 80, and I have no head for sums. But I have lived in this valley 60 years, and I know the smell of a house being robbed the way I know the smell of rain, and Kestrel Hall has stunk of it for 2 years, and by Michaelmas it will cost this family everything it has." She fixed Linnet with the unclouded eyes. "You came here to look at us before you spent your father's money. Do not deny it. I should think you a fool if you had come any other way, and I have not decided you are a fool. So look, but look properly, with your 2 hands, not from a carriage window. I cannot give you the keys of that house. They are not mine to give, and the man who holds them would fight me. But I can give you my name, which, in this valley, is older than the mortgage, and older than Mr. Culver. I can put you into Kestrel Hall as the thing you already are, my grandson's betrothed, and no one, not Culver, not Cassian himself, will dare turn the future Duchess of Wexmore out of doors while I am alive to ask them why. And in return, your grace, in return you will stay till Michaelmas. You will take that house in your 2 hands and see what you find. And on Michaelmas morning you will do one of 2 things. You will marry my grandson of your own free choosing and lift this house out of the water. Or you will go back to Saltmouth, a free woman and a rich one, and let the whole of it drown, and I will not say one word to stop you. It will be yours to decide, and no one's else. That is the only kind of bargain worth the making with a woman who holds all the strings." Linnet was quiet a moment. "Your grace knows what I hold. Of course I know. I am old, not blind. Your father was a careful man, and careful men do not leave their daughters to be emptied. You could ruin us with a word. That is exactly why I will trust you, and my grandson cannot. He is not yet able to bear knowing how wholly he lies at the mercy of the woman he left in the sun." The old eyes glinted. "He tells me you will be back at his gate by Michaelmas, grateful and glad to be married on any terms he likes to name. He is very sure of it." "Is he?" said Linnet. "It was not a question, he is. I should like, before I die, to see him wrong about something. Prove him wrong. Something in Linnet, the merchant's daughter who had been priced her whole life and never once valued, knew in the old woman the first person in a long while who had looked at her and seen not a fortune, but a use, which is a colder thing than love and a cleaner one and nearer to respect. She thought of the screaming hawk. She thought of the drowning house with all its lamps lit. She thought of her father, who had bound her money to her own hand so that she need never be a purse, and who had wanted, more than any coronet, for someone one day to look at his daughter and see her. "I will stay till Michaelmas," she said. "I will take the house in my hands. But hear one promise now, your grace, plainly, for I only say such things once as you do. I will not save Kestrel Hall to buy myself a husband. If I lift it from the water, it will be because it was worth the lifting, and not one day before I am sure of that." The dowager smiled. Then, for the first time, a thin, dry, frightening smile that took 10 years off her. "Good," she said. "You have until the harvest to learn what this house is worth. I suggest you begin with the one man who does not want you to learn it." Kestrel Hall did not want her, and Kestrel Hall said so in the way that houses do, below stairs, out of her hearing, in the small, cold civilities of servants who have privately decided that a newcomer will not last the season. The bet was laid in the servants' hall before her boxes were fairly unpacked, and no one troubled overmuch to hide it. 6 and the odd shilling said the merchant's girl would be gone down the Saltmouth Road by Lammas, that she was a stopgap, a bought bride the master would not even walk downstairs to wed, and that whatever could be left 2 hours in a carriage could be waited out at leisure. Even young Bess, who liked her and was ashamed of the coin, had laid her own on the near side of Michaelmas. Linnet had the whole of the wager, inside 2 days. For the world had spent 23 years looking straight through her, and a person the world looks straight through overhears a great deal that noisier people never catch. She was not offended. Left to bet on it herself, she might have laid the same way. She had all but proved them right already, driving off in the heat. But she did not mean to answer a wager with words. Words had never carried a single argument for her in her life, and she saw no reason to begin trusting them now. She meant to answer it the only way she had ever trusted, by making herself, quietly and without announcement, the one thing the house could not spare, until a morning came when no soul under the roof could picture the place running without her, and the question the wager asked simply stopped being a question a head could hold. She began where her father had taught her a house, like a business, keeps its conscience. At the books and the back door, Culver's estate ledgers were beyond her, locked, watched, no affair of a betrothed. But the household reckonings, the kitchen and cellar and chandlery, the small daily coming and going at the tradesman's door, those the dowager's name laid open to her, and Linnet had been keeping books of exactly that kind since she was 13 on a tall stool with ink to her wrists. Inside a week she had the measure of it, beef that came in high and half-turned, candles billed at town prices and burning like cheap fat, Mrs. Larch weeping over a joint she dared not refuse because Mr. Plank. Culver dealt with the tradesman, and Mr. Culver was not to be crossed. Linnet paid the next week's account in her own hand, courteous and unbudging, and returned the bad beef to Pike the butcher at Outstock, with a note so mild and so precise that the beef which followed it came in sweet and red. A trifle. The kitchen felt it the way a body long in pain feels the first easy hour, but it was the hawk that turned them, in the end. She went to the mews on her fourth morning, past old Corbin the falconer, who had kept a dead man's bird alive for 2 years out of pure grief, and would suffer no other hand near her. The peregrine hunched on her block, filthy and half-starved, feathers broken to quills, and screamed at the world with a fury that had nothing left in it now but fear. Corbin said the master had ordered her fed and let be, that she would take from no fist, that she had put every groom who tried her to flight, and would let no one come near. She were his grace's, he said, meaning the drowned one, and would not look at the bird as he said it. Linnet did not try to break the hawk. She had learned, in a counting house and a hot carriage both, that a terrified creature is never quieted by adding one more loud thing to the din of its world, so she added nothing. She came at the same hour each morning and sat on an upturned pail a little way off, and kept her eyes down, and paid the bird no more heed than she paid the wall. She read her account books aloud to the empty air in a low, dull, level voice, butcher and chandler, corn and coal, the least alarming recitation ever made by anyone, and she did it, and came back and did it again 9 mornings running. On the 10th, the peregrine, worn past terror by plain weariness, which in the end unmakes every wild thing faster than hunger does, stepped from her block to the offered glove, and stood there with her mad heart going and did not strike. Corbin, 60 years old, and, hard as a hinge, had to turn away and be some while about his face. From that morning, the bird answered again to the name the drowned duke had given her, Vesper, and she came to Linnet's fist and to no one else's, and old Corbin, who had touched his hat to nobody since the funeral, touched it to a merchant's daughter in the mews. After the hawk, the house came round. The way a tide comes in, not at any moment you could point to, but everywhere, and all at once. The maids carried their small catastrophes to Linnet now instead of crying over the coal scuttle as they used. Mrs. Larch cooked like a woman handed back a country she had been banished from. And the Duke, who took great pains to be in whatever room she was not, could not help remarking that his house was knitting itself together around him, while his back was turned. He noticed the clock first. On the great stair at Kestrel stood a long-case clock that had stopped at 20 minutes past 2 on the night they carried Corwin home, and for 2 years no hand had dared to wind it, so that the whole house had gone on living inside a silence, with a stopped heart at the center of it. One morning it was ticking. Cassian stood before it a long time before he trusted himself to speak. "Who set it going?" he said, and his voice was not quite steady. "I did, your grace." Linnet was crossing the hall with Vesper hooded on her wrist. A house cannot keep its accounts with time itself stopped in the hall. If you would sooner have it silent again, I will stop at this hour, but a stopped clock brings no one back. It only makes the living later than they need to be. He looked at her, and at his brother's hawk sitting quiet on her glove, and said nothing at all, and went away down the passage. But he did not have the clock stopped. That night, for the first time in 2 years, it struck the hours through the whole sleeping house, and more than one servant lay awake counting them, and could not have told you why their eyes stung. Within the month, with no title and no vow, Linnet Ash was running Kestrel Hall in all but name. Even Thurkel, who on principle mistrusted anyone born in the present century, had taken to bringing her the household questions that for 2 years he had carried up and left, unanswered, at a shut door. And the further into the house she went, the worse its figures looked. She had begun a small book of her own, the true traffic of the door, what the tradesmen were honestly paid, set down week by week in her plain hand. Within a fortnight, her figures would not sit level with the figures Mr. Culver posted for the household to admire. The gap was small at first, a few shillings here and there. But Linnet had spent her whole life with columns, and she knew the one thing every honest column knows. A few shillings that refuse to reconcile are never merely a few shillings. They are the part of something much larger that happens to be showing above the water. She said nothing. She had a great gift for saying nothing. And quietly, patiently, by a single candle, she began to count. We'll pause here a moment, if you want to see how the merchant's daughter settles her account with Kestrel Hall and with the man who left her in the sun. Take a moment to subscribe, for the story is only now beginning to turn. Barnabas Culver kept his office at the cold north end of the house, and he kept it locked. And a locked door, as any counting house teaches early, is only ever a signpost to the thing a man cannot afford to have seen. She did not force it. She waited, as she had waited on the hawk, and her chance came on the first Tuesday of August, which fell out both a market day and a chapel meeting at Altstock. Culver was a deacon. His morning belonged to his prayers and his afternoon to the corn exchange. His clerk, a rabbity boy called Tam, had been packed off to the mill. And the muniment room, which Linnet had every right to be in, for the dowager had set her to listing the deeds and plate against the settlement, gave onto the office by a connecting door, and that door for once was not bolted. She told herself she had come to count deeds. She stood on the threshold of Culver's kingdom, and her eye went to the shelf and stopped, because 13 years on a clerk's stool had taught it what to catch. 2 ledgers stood there for the one running year. Twins, near enough, the same size, the same brown binding, but one had been thumbed soft at the corners with handling, and the other was as clean as the day it was ruled. She took the clean one down first. It was the book that was meant to be seen. An estate a little threadbare but upright, its rents modest, its tenants square with the world, every repair set down and accounted. Then she took down the soft one, and the soft one was where the truth lived, and the truth was not fit for company. The rents in it ran higher, cottage after cottage, than the clean book ever confessed. A shilling levered out of this widow, 2 out of that smallholder, and not a penny of the surplus finding its way onto the shown page. Repairs stood charged that no hammer had ever been lifted for. Tradesmen's bills were entered at one sum and quietly discharged at a smaller, and the difference between the 2 books walked off the edge of every page and out of the house and into no name at all. 2 years of it. This was no footman with a spoon up his sleeve. This was a house being quarried out from underneath, in a fair, clerkly hand, at leisure, while the man who owned it grieved a floor above and could not bring himself to look. And then she came to the line that stopped her cold. Among the past autumn's repairs, entered in Culver's own tidy script, stood £60 for the railing and mending of the fort at Blackford. She had walked down to Blackford her first week in the valley. There was no rail at Blackford. There had never been one, only the black slide of the water and the broken lip of bank, where on a drowned night 2 years gone, a young duke and his horse had gone under in the dark. Culver had drawn £60 for the very rail that might have caught Corwin Ray, and had not sunk a single post for it, and had written the lie down in a hand you could have read across a church, and gone home to his supper. Linnet stood in the cold little office and understood that she was not looking at a thieving servant, but at a patient one, a man who had waited for precisely this house, with no mistress over it, and no master who would read, and a fresh grave to keep everyone's eyes lowered, and had worked his way into it the way wrought works into a beam. From the inside, taking all the time in the world. Then she heard the yard door. She had the soft book back in its place, square to its twin, and was through in the muniment room with the plate list in her hand and a candle at her elbow, telling over apostle spoons under her breath, before Culver came in from the wet with the market still hanging on his coat. He stood in the connecting doorway and considered her, and not a line of the pious calm shifted, but something behind his eyes was taking soundings. Late hours for a bride, Miss Ash. Her Grace wants the settlement plate listed before the lawyers come. She did not raise her eyes from the slate. 24 apostle spoons, 11 of them whole. A poor showing. She wrote it down. Good evening, Mr. Culver. She went past him with her candle and her list, and her hand held steady, until the turn of the stair took her out of his sight. Behind her, she knew, a careful man was standing at his own shelf in the dark, looking at 2 brown books, wondering whether one of them had been moved the breadth of a hair. Culver made the first move, the way frightened men do, mistaking motion for safety. He found her 3 days on, in the passage by the still-room, soft-footed, his voice pitched low, the way his sort always keep it. A word of kindly counsel, Miss Ash, from one servant to another. A young woman with no family and no friend in the county, but a lady of 80 who could not be looked to last, would be wise to keep to the linen presses and the plate, and to leave off asking questions whose answers could never do her any good. Kestrel was a great house with a deal of shadow in it, and brides had come and gone before. Now, one had driven off in front of the county only this summer, had she not? It would grieve him, he said, and the deacon's smile never shifted to see her go the same road before her time. Linnet let him finish. And under all the meekness, she saw plainly the thing that had walked him down the passage. The man was afraid of her. His whole slow harvest depended on there being no one under that roof who looked, or listened, or kept a record. And here she stood, a slate in her hand and a clear eye, planted a few feet from his door. Fear had sent him to frighten her, and fear makes a careless messenger. It points, every time, straight at the buried thing. I keep very good accounts, Mr. Culver, she said, pleasant as milk. It is the one talent no one has ever once asked me to lay down good evening to you. And still she took it to no one. She turned it over 3 nights, and held her peace, and the first of her reasons was plain fear. To go to Cassian was to be looked at, and to be looked at was to be asked her name and her people and her fortune, and behind all 3 stood Saltmouth and the will, and Obadiah Slight, her father's old partner, who had never stopped scratching at the settlement that fenced the ash money off from him, and wanted only a road, and a reason to come, and haul her home. A betrothed who set herself against the steward, and was then unmasked as a merchant's girl, with a hidden fortune and a lawsuit at her back, would be the simplest thing in the world to bundle out of doors. Far wiser to keep her eyes down and let a proud man's house go on picking its own pocket a few years more. It was no concern of hers. She had not come north to fight anyone's battle but her own. She told herself the whole of that. Then she walked out to the cottages at Loomfoot, and had nothing left to tell herself at all. The dowager had sent a basket down to old widow Threadgold, a weaver's widow of 70, whose loom stood dumb now and whose roof let the sky in. Her rent had climbed 2 lady days together, though not a nail had been driven anywhere on the place to account for it. Mr. Culver says his young grace has need of it, the old woman said, folding her swollen hands, and never a word of grievance in her, and the poor lamb lost his brother, so I'll not begrudge the man his rent. It's only that I do wonder the roof was never mended that we were charged the mending of 2 winters back. But I'd not carry so small a trouble to his grace, not on top of his sorrow. And there, in a single cottage, Linnet saw the whole engine laid bare, and was ashamed of her 3 careful nights. Culver had never needed cleverness, only patience and other people's goodness to build upon. A master too broken to look, old women too faithful to make a fuss, a betrothed too afraid for her own neck to speak up. Every last soul in the machine was behaving well, and a household full of good, grieving, frightened people can be stripped to the joists and will thank the man who does it for the gentleness of his hands. She went home and settled it in her mind. A rumor would carry her nowhere. Cassian would not credit it, or Culver would call her a jealous woman with a grudge and have her turned off inside the week. She needed the thing entire, the true book against the false, and witnesses too plain to argue away. And she set about building it as she always had a set of accounts, without noise, in her own hand, 1 proof at a time. All through the tail of August and into September, while the corn came down, she gathered it. Under honest cover of settling the kitchen bills, she took the tradesman's own reckonings, Pike's notched stick, Gully's daybook, Tench the corn factor's receipts, and copied each figure clean, and got Widow Threadgold and 2 more tenants to set their marks to a plain sentence stating the rent they truly handed over. The office was bolted against her now, but she no longer needed it. She was raising the truth from the outside in, out of doorways and tally sticks and the crosses of honest folk who could not write their names. And wherever her figures met his posted ones, they told the tale by daylight. She hid the fair copies in a false floor she had made in her writing case, and each night behind a bolted door by 1 candle she added the day's small gleaning, for half a case she had grasped from the start is worse than none. A whisper, a clever man laughs into the fire, a ledger he cannot. Twice Culver came near to catching her. Once he found her after dark on the north stair with a candle, and asked in that mild way what a bride wanted so near his office at such an hour. Locking the plate room for the night, she said true, and beyond his power to deny, and he did not care for it, and she watched him not care for it, and knew to a nicety why. And then, with Michaelmas a bare fortnight off, and her case all but whole, the sweet-voiced woman arrived. Mrs. Ottilie Vane was cousin to the Duke, reared to expect a great deal more of life than life had since seen fit to hand her. Widowed young, on a jointure that thinned every quarter, she had come oftener to Kestrel and lingered longer since Corwin went into the Wen, resolved that if she could not be its mistress, she would at least be the will behind its closed doors. 2 years back, she and Culver had reached their understanding. He saw her little county debts smoothed away out of the estate's dark river, and she saw his path to the master kept swept, and each held the other upright, and neither could have stood alone. She had not been 2 days in the house before she saw what Culver, for all his watching, had never bothered to see, that the small brown betrothed did not merely manage the place well, but was hiding something while she did it. "Ash," she said one afternoon across the dowager's tea tray, tasting the name as though it were a sweet she was not sure she cared for. Of where, one asks oneself. There are ashes down at Saltmouth, I fancy, in trade shipping, is it? Bales, and bills of lading, and all that busy world. The smile never once reached her eyes. What a wearing thing it must be, to be born a shade above one's money, and a shade below one's company, neither quite served, nor quite serving. Forever watched for the one wrong step. She set down her cup. For I do watch, Miss Ash. It is my single accomplishment. My cousin takes me for an idle woman, but I watch, and I remember what I see. Then you keep the better book of the 2 of us, ma'am, said Linnet, level as a rule. For I never did learn the knack of reading people. I only ever learned to read a column of figures. Out of the depths of her chair, the old dowager made a small, dry noise that, in a lady of lower rank, might fairly have been called a snort. But Linnet walked away with her plain face composed and no comfort in her at all, knowing she had just been introduced to the true enemy of the peace. Not the soft thief in the office, but this one, and that the great clock over the whole business had, in the space of a tea-tray, begun to run very fast indeed. It was the sea that finally wore the distance between them thin, because the sea was the one country both of them had been born into. Cassian had raised avoidance to a discipline. Wherever Linnet was, he contrived to be elsewhere. But a house grows small of an evening, and one wet night she came into the long gallery for a book, and found him at the great table with the charts of the northern station unrolled before him. Not reading them, only sitting over them, the way a man sits with a thing he can neither use nor put away. She had turned to withdraw when her eye caught, on the topmost chart, a coasting course pricked in so close under a lee shore that any salt-mouthed clerk would have struck it out, and before prudence could stop her tongue, she had said so. He looked up as though the chair had spoken. "You read a chart. My father owned 11 ships, your grace. I costed every voyage they made from the age of 13. The freight, the bottomry, the underwriting, the odds of exactly that shore and exactly that wind. A clerk who cannot read a chart is a clerk who loses her father a cargo." Color came up in her face. "Forgive me. It is not my place to correct a captain's courses." "No," he said slowly, and a flicker crossed his face that a less guarded man would have let go on and become a smile. "It is not. Sit down and correct it properly." After that, by no arrangement either of them would have admitted to aloud, she came to the gallery most evenings. And most evenings he was there, and the room with its charts and its low fire became the one stretch of ground the two of them held in common. He was, she found, precisely the man his grandmother had promised. Not cold at all, but a man gone down deep in grief, with a dry, unhurried humor still in him, and a great buried gentleness beneath it, all of it crusted over now with salt, like a garden the sea has got into. He could be got to laugh once in a great while, and each time the sound seemed to take him by surprise, as though it belonged to a man he had mislaid. He spoke of his brother only once. "I was off Farrell when it happened," he said. On a night the fire had burned low between them. 74 days on that coast without once setting a foot to dry land. Corwin went into the Blackford on the 14th of March. I did not learn of it until the frigate brought our letters up on the 2nd of April, my brother 3 weeks in the ground at Kestrel Church, before I knew there was a thing in the world to mourn. I have since worked out that I was at my dinner the very hour they carried him up the bank, laughing, I dare say, at something the surgeon said. He turned a cold pipe over and over in his hands. He wrote to me every month I was at sea, for 11 years. Never a month missed. I have all of them but the last. That one came after him. I have never been able to break the seal. Linnet did not tell him she was sorry. She had learned, from his grandmother, and from the whole of her own life, that the word is a coin that buys nothing at such a counter. She said the harder, truer thing instead. Then he was well loved, to cost you this much still. A grief only ever weighs what the love it was cut from weighed. You need not be ashamed of how heavy yours is, your grace. You should only be ashamed if it had come to you light. He was a long time quiet after that, and the Sunday following, when the Wexmore pew filled at Kestrel Church and Linnet took her place in it at the dowager's side, she felt the whole congregation take note of it, not unkindly now, but with the settling, weighing attention a country parish gives the woman it has decided will be its mistress. Farmers' wives who had looked clean through her in June inclined their heads. Widow Threadgold, from the free seats at the back, gave her a smile, with 3 teeth in it and a world of meaning behind them. The valley had made up its mind about her before the Duke had made up his, which is the way of valleys. It was a night, not long after that, Cassian did the thing that undid her. They had sat laid over the charts, and the fire was down to a red eye when he took from his watch chain an old iron key, worn bright with 200 years of turning, and set it on the table between them, and kept his fingers on it a moment longer than he meant to. "There is a room at the end of the east passage," he said. "My brother's study. His books are in it, the honest ones. The estate as he kept it, every figure set down in his own hand. I have not opened that door since we buried him. I cannot. Everything in the room is his." He drew his fingers back and left the key lying there. "You have set the rest of the house to rights around me, while I hid from it. Set that room right too, if you can bear what waits in it. For I cannot bear even the handle. I would sooner it were you than any man I could pay." Linnet looked at the iron key on the wood between them, still warm from his chain, and knew to the ounce what it was worth, and knew also exactly what it would show her when she turned it, and understood, with a cold, clear grief of her own, that she now held two halves of the same dreadful truth, while he held neither, and not far off, when she would have to lay the whole of it out on the table between them, and watch his face while she did. But not tonight. Neither of them could have borne it tonight. She closed her hand over the key. Thurkel, bringing in the coals, saw her take it, and said nothing, and carried the knowledge back below stairs, where it was understood by breakfast that the future Duchess now held the key to the one room in the house the master himself would not enter, which told the servants, better than any wedding could have done, exactly whose house this had become. She used the key, that same night alone, while Kestrel slept. Corwin's study was a dead man's honest room. His rent rolls stood fair, and whole, and unashamed. The estate as it had truly been before Culver's River began to run underground. Laid alongside the soft brown ledger she had seen in the office, and her own patient outdoor tallies, it made a case no deacon on God's earth could ever laugh back down her throat. Her case was built. It wanted three things only: the nerve to bring it, the right hour to bring it in, and no wrong ears in the room when she did. She had none of the three yet. Michaelmas stood 11 days off. And across the dark passage, behind another door, the sweet-voiced cousin had just unfolded the answer to a letter she had sent south to Saltmouth, and was reading it a second time, and smiling. The blow fell 3 days short of Michaelmas, on the very morning the lawyers came up to sign the settlement. For the wedding was on again, so far as the world could see, and the world had contrived to be present, as it always does where there is something to be looked at. The great hall of Kestrel had not held so much good cloth in 2 years. The parson, a brace of magistrates, a scattering of neighboring families come on one thin pretext or another, the two lawyers with their tapes and their sealing wax laid out like surgeon's instruments, the dowager bolt upright in the best chair, Audeley, sweet and watchful at her shoulder, and Culver soft in the doorway with the estate's papers under his arm and his deacon's face freshly put on. Linnet had come in from the forecourt with the last of the year's roses over her arm. She had been cutting them herself, there being no one left. She trusted to do it properly, when the sound of hard-driven wheels on the gravel turned every head in the hall. A traveling chaise, mud to the axles, slewed to a halt on the very stretch of gravel where a black wedding carriage had once stood 2 hours in the sun. Its door was flung back before the steps were down, and a stout, red-faced man in a plum coat climbed out into the morning, and the basket of roses slid from Linnet's arm and spilled its whole scarlet cargo across the stones. "So this is the borough," said Obadiah Slight, planting himself square and taking in the great front of the house with the eye of a man pricing it for auction. 4 months, girl, you have led me the length of England, and cost me a small fortune in post-horses in the doing of it. Well, no matter now, I have run you to earth at the last." He turned, all bonhomie, to the quality visible through the open doors, delighted past bearing to find so much of it gathered to receive him. "Your servant, gentlemen." Obadiah Slight of Saltmouth, sometime partner to the late Thomas Ashe, and co-executor of his will. This young person is that will's chief legatee, and I am sorry to be the one to say it under a nobleman's roof, but every penny she has led your duke to look for is bound up in a suit of my own in chancery, and is not, at law, hers to hand to any man living. She fled my lawful oversight last winter, rather than settle honestly into a family that had a prior claim upon her. She has hidden herself in your house, under her plainest name, and let the whole county take her for a great catch, and I have come, at no small charge to myself, to carry her home where she belongs. It dropped into the hall the way a stone drops into a still pond, and the rings of it went out across every face there. And Audalie Vane, who had been waiting the whole of her narrow life for a morning precisely such as this one, stepped forward into the widening silence with an opened letter held up in her hand, like a card laid down to take the trick. "I fear it is quite true, cousin," she said, and her voice was as clear and cold and pretty as spring water going over stone. "I took the liberty of one or two small inquiries, for the good of the household, you understand, and of our dear grandmother. She is exactly what this gentleman says she is. A shipping merchant's daughter with a fortune she has taken the most particular pains to bury, playing the modest bride among us for reasons entirely her own. And I do think we are owed those reasons. For why should a woman, with money enough to buy herself outright trouble to hide it, hide her very name, and sit up 6 weeks together copying her betrothed's private accounts by candlelight? To what earthly purpose, cousin? I raise it only for your safety. And your grandmother's." From the best chair by the cold hearth the old dowager said nothing at all, but her knotted hands had tightened on the head of her stick, and she was watching her grandson's face, and not Linnet's, as though she already knew to a certainty what the girl would do, and doubted only what the man would. Every head in the hall came round to Linnet. She looked at Cassian, and she watched him decide, in the space of one breath, that she had lied to him from the first hour. She saw it cross his face and settle there, saw the one person in a whole ruined year who had marked his charts and gentled his brother's hawk and been trusted with his brother's key turn, in a single shift of the light, into a stranger with a bought name and a hidden purse, and a reason of her own for reading his ledgers in the dark, exactly as his cousin so sweetly said. She saw the gallery close and the study close, and every door they had come to share swing quietly shut somewhere behind his eyes, and his face went to her the way it had gone to the empty gravel on the June morning she drove away, when a thing he had been promised turned out to be quite other than the promise. She could not in fairness blame him for it. To a man who had swallowed his whole pride to be rescued by a stranger's money, the news that the stranger had a buried purse and a false-sounding name, and a lawyer baying at her heels could only land as one more paper he had signed without troubling to read. He had let himself trust exactly once in 2 years, and here, in front of the assembled county, stood the reckoning for it. And standing there among her scattered roses stripped bare in front of them all, Linnet Ashe made the strangest discovery of her life, which was that she was not afraid. She had spent the better part of a year bracing for this exact minute, the tracing, the naming, the fat familiar hand on a carriage door, and now the minute had come, and the roof of the world had not fallen in on her after all. For 23 years she had kept herself small so that she might be safe, and here was the smallness torn clean off her in the middle of a crowded hall, and still she stood upright on the stone, and what was left when the fear ran out of her was very near to lightness. There was only the truth left to carry now, and after so long a hiding, the truth weighed nothing at all in the hand. She bent, in the ringing hush, and gathered one of the fallen roses up off the flags, and laid it back in the basket at her feet, unhurried, as though the saving of the flowers were the one piece of business in that hall which could not wait. It bought her a single breath. In the pocket of her gown her fingers found the small brass weight, her father's, and closed round it once, for ballast, exactly as they had closed round it in the carriage in June. Then she straightened and let it go, and lifted her head, and the whole great hall was waiting on her. "This gentleman has told you the truth," she said, and her voice went out clear and unhurried to the 4 corners of the hall. "Every word of it. I am Linnet Ashe." My father was a Saltmouth merchant, and he left me a great deal of money, and he tied it, knowing his partner to the bone, to my own hand alone, past the reach of any husband, and past the reach of this gentleman, who has spent a good part of what he was set to guard, and brings his suit for no better reason than that he cannot lay a finger on a shilling of mine while it stays mine. I left his house last winter because he meant to marry me to his son and keep my father's fortune in slight hands. I came north under my own plain name because a woman known to carry money is a woman who is hunted, and I was very tired of being hunted. She turned from slight to the Duke, and from here on she spoke to no one else in the room. And yes, your grace, I have copied your accounts. 6 weeks by candlelight, exactly as your cousin says. They are upstairs this moment, fair copied and whole. Because your house is being robbed to the roots by a man standing in this hall, the rents wrung a shilling at a time out of your widows and set down nowhere, the repairs paid for in your name and never once made. The ford your brother drowned in billed to this estate for a rail that was never so much as begun, and I can lay the whole of it in front of you before this day is out, and prove every figure in it twice over. For the length of one held breath, no one in the hall so much as moved. Then Barnabas Culver made the single mistake of his careful life. He laughed, a small, soft, pitying laugh, the indulgent laugh of a sensible man at a young woman's fancy, and he heard how wrong it was the instant it left him, because there is a laugh no guilty bookkeeper can hold back, and no honest one ever needs to. "Your Grace will make allowances," he began. "A bride can hardly be looked to understand the running of a great—" But the sentence had nowhere to go. Audley's lovely face had gone perfectly still, and the Duke of Wexmoor had stopped looking at Linnet as at a woman who had betrayed him. He was looking at her now the way a captain on a striking ship looks at the one man left on deck who is still, against all hope, telling him the exact truth about the water beneath their feet. "Show me," he said, "all of it, now." They held the reckoning in Corwin's study, which Cassian entered, that afternoon, for the first time since the funeral, because the truth of his brother's house could be told honestly in no other room in it. It ran the rest of that day and half into the night. Linnet spread the whole 6 weeks of it across the great desk, her own true book, the tradesmen's tallies, the tenants' crosses, and beside them, the dead Duke's honest rent rolls, off the very shelves they stood among. Thirkell brought the tradesmen in through the wet, uneasy in their Sunday coats under so much gilt ceiling, and one after another they laid their own reckonings against Linnet's and swore to them. Pike, Gully, Tench, every man paid less than the shown book claimed, and not one ever paid a farthing to rail any ford at Blackford. Corbin brought the tenants up the back stair, Widow Threadgold on his arm, and they set their marks again in the candlelight, under the Duke's own eyes. When the 2 brown ledgers were carried in at last from the office and set side by side on the desk, Cassian read them without a word. Whatever grief had made of him, it had not made him slow, and he had the shape of the whole thing inside 5 minutes. The fair book that was shown, the soft book that was true, and the quiet underground river that had run 2 years between the two of them and out of the house into no name at all. He turned the leaves until he reached the line and read it once, and then read it again, £60 for the railing and mending of the ford at Blackford, and he laid his open hand flat upon the page and held it there a long while. And when at last he spoke, it was not to Culver at all. He would have caught a rail, he said, to the room, to the shelves, to the brother whose door he had finally come through. On that night, in that water, if there had been one post standing, he would have had it. And you drew the money for it, and you left the ford bare, and you wrote it down in a fair hand and slept. He raised his head, and his face was a terrible thing to look at, and for the first time in 2 years it was wholly awake. And I signed it. You set it in front of me, and I put my name to it, because signing was easier than reading his writing. I have been a coward in my own house for 2 years, and you built your whole living on my being one, down to the last shilling. His voice did not climb. It went the other way, low and level, and down to the bone. You will be off this land before it is light, Culver, and in front of the Aldstock bench by noon, and every figure this lady has taken goes down the road in the cart beside you. What you can give back to my tenants, you will give back. What you cannot, you will answer for as the law answers such men. Thurkel. Go up with him and watch his hands the while he packs. Culver went, because by then there was nothing else on earth left for him to do. At the study door he turned once, and every ounce of the meekness had drained out of him, and what stood underneath it had never been meek at all. "You would have done well to keep to your spoons, Miss Ashe," he said. "The spoons were never my difficulty, Mr. Culver," she answered. "It was always the ones that had gone missing. Good night." That left Slight, who had spent the long reckoning shrinking by inches in his chair, and whose chancery suit did not outlive the first plain question the Duke's own lawyer put to it. For a co-executor who cries fraud in another man's house does very poorly when asked, gently, to open his own books. And Obadiah Slight's books, it was written all over him, would not bear the lifting of the cover. He went back down the Saltmouth Road 2 mornings later with his fine suit already dying under him and his post-horses, this time entirely unrepaid, and the settlement that Thomas Ashe had built to stand, knowing to the inch the man he built it against, stood. And that left Audley. She had sat out the whole slow unbuilding of it in the corner of the study, her letter crushed to a rag in her lap, watching the machine she had oiled for 2 years come to pieces board by board in the candlelight. When it was done, she rose, and she was handsome still, and upright still, and she made her last throw with the flat courage of a gambler pushing the final coin across the bays. "You will make a fine tale of me now, I don't doubt," she said to the Duke. "Your devoted cousin who let a thief pay her milliner. Oh, I always knew the source of it. Do you imagine a woman as pinched as I am cannot name where every kindness comes from? Turn me out then? And send me where? £100 a year, a widow's cap, and the privilege of being poor in the very rooms where I was once an equal. You have never once in your life lain down, uncertain whether the roof over your head was your own." Her chin stayed up, but her hands had begun to shake. "She buried a fortune to be quit of one fat man's son. I would have buried one twice as deep to be quit of the whole grinding performance of it, had I ever owned a fortune to bury. Do not sit there and name me a monster. I am nothing of the kind. I am frightened, that is all, and have been a very long time, and there is no labor on earth half so wearying." The Duke's face had closed over again, flint as it had been that June morning on the gravel, and he opened his mouth, and Linnet saw the justice rising in him and knew that justice here would finish Audley Vane for good. "Your Grace," she said, "if I may." He looked at her and shut his mouth and gave her the smallest nod. Linnet crossed the room and stood in front of the frightened, upright, spiteful woman who had tried that very morning to bury her. She did not gloat. A lifetime of being the quiet one had taught her that the gloat is the one move the cruel always see coming, and she had made it a rule never to hand the cruel the scene they had braced for. "You let stolen money settle your debts," she said quietly, "and you knew it was stolen, and that is a kind of theft, and His Grace knows it as well as you do. But you never raised Widow Threadgold's rent by a farthing. You never charged a drowned man's ford for a rail that was never built. That was another hand than yours. What you did was watch and profit and hold your tongue, which is the very thing I did myself in this house from the day I found it out until this morning in the hall. I am the last woman under this roof with any right to condemn you for it." She kept her eyes on the bright, terrified ones and did not look away. "You see everything. You miss nothing that crosses a room. There is honest work in a great house for a woman made that way. Books to be kept straight, a still room to run, A whole household to be held to its true weight. Take it. Be neither served nor serving. Stop being so tired. You would owe it to no one under this roof, and to me least of anyone, and I should be glad to have that understood between us. Audelie stared at her. Whatever she had nerved herself to withstand, it had not been kindness, and kindness went straight through her guard where justice would only have hardened it. "Why?" she said, and it came out of her without a scrap of grace, wrenched loose. "Because I know to the last grain," said Linnet, "how it wears on a person to live, poor and genteel at once, in rooms where she was once an equal. And because a house that has just put one thief out of its doors ought not to mark the day by making a pauper of another. Good night, Mrs. Vane." When the two of them were alone at last among the guttering candles, the Duke stood a long time with his hand still resting on his brother's book, as though he had not yet found the strength to lift it clear. It was he who broke the quiet. "You knew," he said. "Weeks. You carried the tenants their baskets and marked my courses and held that key, and never said one word of it to me. Why not?" "Because in September you would not have believed me," she said. "A man deep in grief does not want a stranger walking in to tell him his brother's house is being emptied. So I brought you no suspicion. I waited until I could set in front of you a thing there would be no refusing. And there was my own reason under that, which does me no credit and which the whole county heard this morning. I had a fortune to keep hidden, and I chose safe over useful for as long as my nerve would hold. I am not proud of it." "No," he said slowly, "but you did not, in the end, choose it. In the end, you were found out, and you stood up in front of the lot of them and spoke, when you might have stayed small and kept your money well hidden and let my house slide under without a word and spared yourself this whole reckoning." He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first true time, which was very likely the case. "Thank you. I have not said it. I am saying it now. 2 words, and out of that shut and salted man, they were worth a very great deal more than 2. And Linnet bent her head and did not trust her voice to answer, and gathered up her 6 weeks of honest figures off the desk and left him alone in his brother's room with the true accounts open on it at last. Michaelmas came in, gold, and cold the way it does in the North Country. The debt fell due with the day, and with it the whole question the summer had been built around, and the county, the very people who had watched a bride driven off an empty forecourt in June, contrived once more to be on hand, for the rent-day audit was held in the great hall, and half of them had honest business there, and the other half only wished they had. Linnet came down that morning expecting to be asked, at last, for the word that would haul Kestrel Hall up out of the water. She had settled somewhere in the small hours of that long night in Corwin's study what her word was going to be. She was not asked. Cashin met her at the foot of the great stair, and he did not take her in to the lawyers. He walked her out instead, through the doors and into the hard gold light of the forecourt, where a carriage stood waiting on the gravel, the same black carriage, its painted arms no longer smelling of varnish. Old Sowerby up on the box with his hat turning in his hands. The county drifted out at their backs, scenting, the way a county always does, that whatever was worth the watching was about to happen out of doors. "I have thought a great deal this month about what I owe to say to you today," Cassian said low, though a good many people stood near enough to hear, and it was plain he meant them to. "And I find there is only the true thing to say. You hold every rope of this house in your hand. You can lift the mortgage off it with a word this morning, or you can step up into that carriage and go home to Saltmouth a free woman and a rich one, and let Kestrel Hall go down into the mere, and there is no law, and no man in England could call it a wrong. It is yours to decide, and no one's else." He looked at the waiting carriage and back at her. "The Saltmouth road is open. Sowerby will carry you wherever you tell him, and this time I will not so much as call out after you. I did that once already, to my lasting shame, and had not even troubled to learn the name I was calling. I know it now. The forecourt had gone very still. 100 of the best coats in the county, and a black carriage, and its door standing open in the sun. "I will not marry you to save my house," Coachman said. "I would sooner lose the roof. I am asking you because you were the one soul in a broken year who was never for a single moment afraid of me, who left me sitting in the sun when I had earned it, and came back and wound my clock and gentled my brother's hawk, and would not let me drown by inches out of good manners. Marry me because you choose it, Linnet, or climb up into that carriage and be gone. Whichever you do, I will meet the debt myself or lose the house, honestly, by my own hand. But I will not be bought a wife, and I will not be a wife's bad bargain. You taught me that much. You said you would not be spent like a purse. It turns out that neither in the end will I." Linnet looked at the open carriage door and at the Saltmouth Road running away beyond the gates, and at the man who had, at the very last, held out to her the one thing that all her weighed and counted and carefully priced life had never once been offered, a free choice made in the open with nothing bought and nothing owed on either side. She thought of the shadow of the West Tower creeping toward the wheel on a June afternoon. She thought of her father, of the stubborn, inarticulate love that had walled her fortune off from every man alive, when the whole of what he had wanted, past any coronet, was only this: that his daughter should one day be looked at by somebody and wholly seen. She did not get up into the carriage. "Cassian," she said. She had never once used his name, and the forecourt heard her use it now, and so did he, and something crossed his shut face that was worth a great deal more than the whole Ash fortune and every ship it ever floated. "Yes. And you may take that for the plain word, since you have gone to such trouble to leave me free to say it. I have spent 23 years holding my tongue, and I find I have no further use for the habit. I will marry you, choosing it as myself, and for no reason under heaven but that I have decided to." She could not help the thing that got loose at the corner of her own mouth. "On one condition, your grace." "Name it." "The fort at Blackford is railed and mended before the winter floods come down. Done properly, by the man whose trade it is, and paid the honest £60 it should have cost, and not a shilling over, so that no living soul ever again goes into that water on a black night for the want of a single post." And the Duke of Wexmoor laughed aloud in the gold morning in front of the whole assembled county, which had not heard the sound out of him in 2 years, and did not for a moment know it for what it was. From her chair inside the hall door, the old dowager set down her glass and allowed herself, at 80, to look for one moment wholly and entirely satisfied. By the first hard frost, there was no one left in the valley who called Linnet anything but the mistress of Kestrel Hall, because there was nothing else honest left to call her. The mortgage came off the house, not bought away, but given freely, out of her own hand into the estate, and in the giving of it she came at last upon the one truth about money her father had spent his whole life failing to teach her across a counter: that money handed over with an open hand is the only kind that can never afterward be taken back from. What Culver had wrung out of the tenants across 2 years was totted up to the last coin and carried back to them, door by door, and where the man himself had nothing left to restore, Cassian made the difference good out of his own pocket, and reckoned it the cheapest bargain he had ever struck. Culver answered to the Aldstock bench, and then to the assizes above it. Slight suit died in chancery of its own bad conscience. Ottilie Vane took the keeping of the household books and the still-room into her clever, watchful hands, and was not made gentle all in a season, for no one unlearns 15 years of fear that quickly. But she kept an honest account under that roof, and she and Linnet came, with the turning of the year, if never quite to friendship, then to the particular hard respect of 2 women who each knew to the grain what it cost to live, pinched and proud, in rooms where one was once received as an equal. The falcon Vesper flew free over the near paddock that autumn, and came back to Linnet's fist every dusk of her own choosing, which is the only way a hawk was ever truly kept by anyone. The clock on the great stair went on telling the hours. And on a winter night by the study fire, in a room that no longer frightened a soul in the house, the last letter Corwin ever wrote, his brother, was opened at long last, with a wife's hand lying over the Duke's while he read what was in it. As for the Dowager Araminta, she lived to see 2 Michaelmases come in clean and the whole house full again. And on the second of them she pronounced herself content, which, she said, after 80 years and 4 graves, was as much as any woman of sense had a right to expect, and rather more than most were ever handed. They were married quietly at Kestrel Church, where Corwin lay under the north wall. And late on, a mild evening at the close of that first honest summer, the Duke of Wexmoor came looking for his wife, and found her where some part of him had known she would be, in the study, in the chair, by the low fire, the great true account book of the estate open across her knee and 1 candle burning at her elbow, and her father's small brass weight set upon the page to hold it flat. She was not working at it. She was only sitting with it open, the way a person sits with a thing that has finally, after long trouble, come right. "You have run the whole of it square and true," he said from the doorway. "There is not a crooked figure left in the house to straighten. Whatever will you find to do with yourself now, Duchess?" She looked up at him across the little flame, level and clear and wholly unafraid, exactly as she had looked at him out of a hot carriage on that first blazing afternoon, the day he had told his butler she would come